Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone. We are doing a special life lessons series of shows here on Big Blend Radio's Quality of Life show and a podcast channel. And we're doing these every, 2 to 3 to 4 months. And this one is all about life lessons that we've learned from family members. And we have a series of segments that are all going to be part of this broadcast. And we're going to kick it off with a conversation between two authors. We've got Kimberly Hess and Michael Nemeth. And Kimberly is the author of the book, A Lesser Mortal, The Unexpected Life of Sarah B. Cochran. And talk about some family lessons. Now, Sarah is actually an ancestor of Kimberly, and you can go to her website, Unexpected Life of Sarah B. Cochran. And Sarah was known as the Coal Queen. So welcome back, Kimberly. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well. How are you?
Doing good. I'm glad to have you here. And also Mike, everyone, Mike Nemeth. I always say Nemeth. It's Nemeth. He got me the other day. Mike Nemeth is the author of a number of books. And recently we were talking about his books that revolve around a main character called Eddie Kovacs. And that really takes us into the baby boomer generation. And I've been getting some interesting feedback on that because I didn't realize the boomer generation was so controversial. Mike, welcome back. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me again.
This is great to have you here. And I want to tell everyone to go to your website, MikeNemethAuthor.com. So yeah, a tissue, that I want to go to those two books we just featured, The Two Lives of Eddie Kovacs and also A Tissue of Lies. Does he as a character or anybody in his family, the Kovac family, resonate with your family at all?
So you want me to spill the beans, huh?
Well, just no spoilers. You can spill, but not spoil.
Yeah, there are actually 2 volumes. It begins with A Tissue of Lies when Eddie is 15 years old. And I think he learned most of his life lessons when he was, in fact, a teenager. And what he learned mostly was that nobody was ever going to hand him a manual on how to live a good life, right? Initially, like everyone else, he learned from his parents, who were part of the silent generation, or, often called the greatest generation. His father was a World War II veteran. And so what he learned from them was about the sacrifices you have to make in life, and about how you have to approach critical times in your life with some level of courage and bravery. Eddie's father went off to war at the age of 18. And I don't want to give too much away about the 2 books, but in the second volume, Eddie himself is off to war. And he finds that growing up and then going off to war, in Eddie's case, Vietnam, is all about the choices you make. The choices you make for getting involved, the choices you make while you are involved. So I think what he learned from his father was that he had to be careful in making those choices, but that a lot of the results are unpredictable. And when they're unpredictable, you just have to, pull up your bootstraps and reach into your reservoir of courage and bravery.
And I love that you've written these books. And like I was kidding around about, the controversial sides of the baby boomer generation, because, what I've noticed, we've gotten some feedback where, one gentleman yesterday messaged me. He's like, well, boomers are so underrated now. And yet I think what's so important about your books is you're giving people an understanding of what boomers have gone through what the generations going from the silent or the greatest generation to the boomer generation. We had Vietnam and that's the controversy, I think, is the Vietnam War is where that started. Then you've got the hippies to IBM, as we've talked before, so it's a very interesting era to talk about, but also to learn because, things changed. And then we get to like the 80s. Oh my gosh, my generation. Oh, that was a little, different. So yeah, I love that you do that. And going over, Kimberly with Sarah Cochran now. So she is an ancestor, right? So there were lessons. She kind of broke the mold. Like, wouldn't you say she had lessons in that regard of breaking the mold for women?
I think so. I mean, she was someone who grew up in poverty and then happened to marry a young coal magnate in Western Pennsylvania. And he and their only child died when she was 42 and then 44. And at that point, she inherited the entire business portfolio in the coal and coke industry, which women basically were barred from having jobs in the coal industry in Pennsylvania at that time. So she was very unusual in the career that she had. But she was also a regional philanthropist and also a suffragist. So in some ways, she was doing exactly what we would expect women of the early 20th century to do, and in other ways, behaving very differently from what we would expect. And because I'm related to her, I grew up hearing a little bit about her. But in researching the book, I found out that she had a connection to a fraternity and even had a fraternity house named for her in West Virginia. And did more research on this and found out that that was in memory of her son, that she had that connection. And it became not only a source of information for me about how her life progressed once she was widowed, but it also showed how much she found a sense of purpose and went back to that sense of purpose and, also found joy through purpose too, because sometimes when you only know of a person as being left without their family, you tend to think of that person as being rather sad and maybe not looking at life in a positive way. And she, in fact, looked at it very positively and lived very joyfully the rest of her life.
That's a good point. I mean, and to find who you are and to have strength in that, doesn't that, go back to Eddie Kovacs too, for you, Mike, in your novels?
Yes, absolutely, strength. But the happiness that Kimberly mentioned is also sort of intriguing. Eddie ends up with a fair number of regrets about the choices he made, learning from his parents, who sort of had a black and white view of morality. Eddie typically chose the right thing to do. And he was surprised sometimes to find that even the right thing has ramifications, and that sometimes you have to pay a price when you do the right things, which he did in the war, and which he did in caring for his wife as she became extremely ill with cancer. But in the end, happiness, I think, is a choice. I tell my daughter all the time that, nothing is perfect about life. And it's another choice you can make. You can choose to be happy, in spite of whatever you might be going through. And it sounds like that was the case with Kimberly's, woman. And, it turns out to be the case with Eddie as well. Eddie becomes a little bit cynical as he grows older, but he's willing to accept the fact that the world might make you a little bit cynical, but it's still a place where you can be happy if you choose to be.
Would you agree with that too for Sarah, Kimberly?
Yeah, I think sometimes happiness is a lot of hard work in finding. And if you're willing to do the work and think about what you're interested in and what brings you joy and, what purpose you have, which is usually related to what you're interested in, you can find that. And I think that's what she did in, investing in communities and people's educations. And I've started to hear stories since the book was published about how she would donate musical instruments to people who wanted to learn how to play them but didn't have the money to buy the instruments. And this was because she happened to love music as well. So, that's just one example of how she was looking at her purpose and finding happiness through it and creating
Wow.
happiness for other people too.
We forget that. You know what I mean? We do forget about finding happiness. We get so, we have to do this, we have to do this, dictated by what society says. And, that's not true. We can carry our own flag and do what we want, So I think you're both bringing up really wise lessons for us all, and maybe a reminder even. And it does sound, Kimberly, like you may have to write a second book. Every time I chat with you, I'm like, she's got more stuff now that it's out. Do you ever think that you're going to end up doing a second one?
I've thought different times that it would be interesting to write a fictional book and use information that I've come across from Sarah and her story or from other family stories in it. Just because in a way fiction would give you more latitude for dealing with characters and making things work out a little more neatly than when you're doing research on someone's biography and you reach a dead end and maybe there's no good reason to reach a dead end, but there it is. So it could be interesting to do that. Yeah.
Ooh. Well, Mike, you got to coach her on that. You got that part. She can write though, but
I can tell you, I began my writing career writing nonfiction, and I found it nothing but really, really hard work.
Oh.
Nonfiction is a lot of hard work. Fiction, on the other hand, is a lot of fun.
Oh.
You can say what you want. Your characters can say what they want and do what they want. And oftentimes they will, in fact, take over and lead you down the path. You begin to get to know your characters and you let them behave as they really would. And so fiction is a lot easier and a lot more fun.
This is cool. I love these conversations. I think we're going to have to do one about life lessons from authors. I think we're going to have to do that as a follow-up from this conversation too. But I want to go to each of you too. You've written, obviously, Sarah Cochran is related to you, Kimberly, but let's touch on your own families. Is there something that you want to share with the audience that is a life lesson that you hold dear to your heart from your family, growing up? Let's start with you, Mike. Is there anything in specific? I like the happy. I'm hanging on to that happiness thing because I think it's been a rough year in this, world with hurricanes and, political drama. I'm not getting into that, but, I think there's a lot of just, there's some darkness out there and we're not supposed to stay in the darkness for too long, even though it's winter. That's why I wanted to do this show too, is we're supposed to find joy, and you've got to go through the tough spots, but when you're out of it, boy, does it feel good, and you've grown something, so
pleasure
yeah,
is the absence of pain.
yes, exactly. It's true. So what would you give one life lesson to everyone that you've held dear to your heart that you kind of go back to?
Yeah, I think, my parents were very devoted. They were devoted to each other, but devoted to their children as well. And I witnessed father's very long illness, and the care my mother took of him during that entire period of time was truly inspirational. when you're growing up and your kids, your parents are just those people who make you follow the rules, right? You don't really get to know them until you begin to share similar experiences, have kids of your own, and you find yourself applying similar lessons to your children that you learned at your parents' knees. And in the long run, the beauty, the benefit, I guess, of being completely devoted to your family is what I'll always take away from my experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a commitment, and love is commitment. Family is commitment. And, when it's followed through, there's nothing more beautiful than that, right? In a relationship, whether it's husband and wife or the family, and love is a commitment. Love is hard, but, yeah, I love that. I love that. What about you, Kimberly?
I think I was inspired as I grew up by several women in my family who were just very tenacious. My maternal grandmother had polio as a very little girl in the early 1920s.
Wow.
And she overcame that at a time when they weren't very sure if she would or not. And my great grandmother, on my dad's side, who I wrote about in my book, had a stroke later in life, and no one was entirely sure if she would walk again. And she was able to because she stayed with her physical therapy and just decided, regardless of what anyone says, I'm going to do this. And I was inspired, as I got older by how they were able to overcome some of the odds at the time and just, kind of will this better life for themselves to happen. And that it must have been very difficult at the beginning when they thought that doctors didn't even know what would be their fate in certain cases.
Wow. And to just will it, that is holding on to hope, right?
Yes.
And you have to have some kind of belief.
Yeah.
It's like blind faith, right?
Exactly.
You just hold on to that. That's another commitment. Yeah.
Yeah. And a commitment to yourself to know that you can make something happen.
Oh man. So you really are strong on the women's side, aren't you? I love this.
I mean, there are interesting men too, but those two, made for a good story for today. So.
I love that. No, because it's really true. I mean, I look at, my mom, Nancy, and here we are still working together. And next year this is 28 years we've been working together in this company next year, 18 years of podcasting. I mean, and we're still going through all kinds of technical changes. I mean, she started this company in South Africa as a single woman. She went to Kenya with me as I was a little kid. I was a year and a half, and she tied me to the suitcases and tied the suitcases together and rolled us all through the airport and went to Kenya. And this was her dream. She's a wildlife artist primarily, and did newsletters and was writing for magazines. And I mean, this is all in our blood since, I don't know, the beginning of time of our family. Speaking of genealogy, apparently we have a lot of musicians and journalists and lawyers. Go figure. We're pretty much done a little bit of all of that between the two of us. But she went to Africa on her own to go work with Joy Adamson, which is, Elsa the Lion, Born Free. If anyone Googles that, you'll see who Joy Adamson and her husband George Adamson were split up, but doing the same thing and saving and conserving wildlife in Kenya. So off goes my mom and gets to her camp, which is a whole other story. And Joy Adamson she knew I existed, but basically said, you can't have your daughter here. And my mom's like, what do you mean? I have a child. Of course my child's coming with me. And no. And so I lived with two different tribes in the bush, and we worked together, and not worked together, but, we were together. She didn't just dump me off in the middle of a tribe in Africa, but she, tenacity is a very good word and very stubborn. And in Kenya, as a single white woman, you weren't getting around anything. She couldn't open a bank account. She would have to go in the street and grab a guy and say, just stand next to me so I could open a bank account. She couldn't open a post office box. You were way at the bottom of the totem pole. And it even happened in South Africa when we first got there. There was apartheid going on, of course. And there was also places women were not allowed to go as well. These were men only institutions. And she got through it all and kept going. She even got to the point in Kenya when we got robbed and Joy Adamson got murdered and our life completely changed, but we were still in Kenya. And, we got robbed and the chief of police stole her car. And that's what happens. You get robbed, they take everything else. And they stole her car. My mom had the tenacity to sue the police and worked with his lawyer on it. And he kept saying, you need to go home. She's like, no, this is a principle of right and wrong. She won and he still took the car, but she won and it was about right and wrong. So, and she was able to have this wonderful art career, which flourished into obviously what we do, which is all connected. But I think that's some tenacity too. I've always learned that, there's always a way. It just may not be as easy as you want it to be, and if you go for what you want, that is happiness when you're working towards your passion, no matter how hard it is, which is frustrating. I mean, even with us traveling the country, that's frustrating at times. It's hard at times, but you're following your passion, which I think is commitment and happiness. You're making a commitment to happiness. So I love these. You guys, you've got me all inspired for the day. Thank you. You gave me a dose of happy. This is awesome. So, Kimberly, we're waiting for the second book. Just saying. Everyone, Unexpected Life of SarahB.Cochran.com. And the book is out there now, so please go get it, especially if you enjoy women's history, enjoy a good story of someone doing what they want. And also, if you are interested in Pennsylvania history. And then, of course, go to Mike's website, MikeNemethAuthor.com. How many books have you got now, Mike?
5 novels, 3 nonfiction books from long ago.
Wow. And then next, what's coming?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Eddie carries on in current daytime. The second volume ended with him on Tybee Island, which is just off the coast of Savannah.
Beautiful.
And he's a detective, so we could go on that way, or we could fill in the blanks in between. The 2 books is another possibility. So I'm kind of between right now. I take some time off, especially because of the holidays and so forth here. So January, I'll start thinking again.
Cool. Well, we'll be in Georgia in January. Maybe we'll see you. That'll be awesome.
That'd be fabulous.
Wouldn't that be cool? That would be cool. We'll have to get up to Pennsylvania and see Kimberly too. We were in your area so often, but that was during COVID, and I was like, and then every time we talk about Sarah Cochran, it's like every time we do anything on Pennsylvania, there she is. she touched something,
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Everyone, please stay tuned. We have more fabulous conversations about life lessons from family. Thank you so much. So we are talking about life lessons that you've learned from family. This could be a parent, it could be a cousin, it could be a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt. It could be a distant relative that maybe you even haven't met. You've just read about in a diary, a historic diary. Who knows? But you know what? Our past does teach us. And that's what we're talking about today. And we have travel writer Lisa Evans back on the show. You can keep up with her at writerlisa.com. As always, the links are in the episode notes. So Lisa, welcome back. How are you?
Good. I'm really good. How about yourself?
Good, good. Now you were on our first Life Lessons show, about boomers, right? And you know that I got some like people messaging me going, you boomers are the ones who did this. And I'm like, what? Stop it. Go listen to the show. Maybe that will teach you a little bit. So that we had some interesting reactions on this, but, family can teach us some lessons. Sometimes a negative thing happens in a family and that teaches you a lesson too, not just the positive things. But for you, why did you decide, hey, I want to be on this episode talking about family and life lessons? Do you have a specific family member or just in general, your family?
Well, I think I think that it's both. It's both. It's the older generation, and I have a number of grandchildren, and I will also take some advice from them as well, because kids are the purest form. I mean, they see, they don't see color, they don't see anything. They just know what goes on. And it's amazing to me, out of the mouths of babes is one of the things. And I just get such a kick out of listening to my younger grandkids and some of the things that come out of their mouth, because they're like, if you stop and think about it, you know what, why can't everybody be like that kind of thing? But, and then of course you have the old standbys from my parents and my grandparents and that type of thing. I mean, I have some really good memories of, spending summers with my grandparents, and we used to go camping and just doing things, and just watching my grandparents do different things. And, my parents were pretty cut and dried. I mean, I'm of the boomer generation, so they were the World War II Depression era, after Depression era kind of thing. So, they learned some hard lessons going along the way too. So it's interesting to me, some of the things, like every now and then, when you're doing something and then you hear a voice and it's your parents, my parents have been gone a long time. So it's like they're talking to you. It's pretty weird.
Yeah. There's certain things that may have bugged you as a teenager, or like, oh man, they're telling me this, I don't want to. And then later in life, you're like, oh yeah, thank you. You were right. It's like they remind you when to, look at the red flags, that are waving. They teach you the red flags in life. And, I remember you teaching us about be 5 minutes early, right? 5 to 10 minutes early. That's here on my list.
That's here on my list. It is.
I knew it. And you are always 5 minutes early.
Yeah, it's just in 5 minutes is, to me, that's like almost late. But yeah, it's one of those things. And it was my parents, but it was also my employers when I first started out, when you're 18, 19, whatever, and you get your first quote unquote real job, and the things that you learn from your boss or your mentor or the whoever. And it's amazing how many times they coalesce with what your parents have told you. Although when you're a know-it-all teenager, none of this, you think it's all crazy, but the time thing is definitely, I remember having one of my bosses say to me, I don't care what you do after hours. I don't care, but he was like, don't ever be late for a meeting, ever. And that was always something that stuck in my mind, especially when you're younger and, you go out perhaps on a Thursday night and you still have to be at work Friday morning. I was never, ever late. I'll be perfectly honest with you. But I would just remember a couple of my dad's favorite sayings, and it's funny how often I repeat them either in just general conversation or to my kids. It's, one of his big thing was say what you mean and mean what you say. Basically, don't embellish, don't lie, don't just do what you're going to say. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you're going to and I won't even use the term threaten, but, in the instance of, let's say you're at a job and you think you need more money. And so you figure you're going to play the game of, hey, let's say I'm going to leave, and then they call your bluff, and then you're out of luck. And it just always sticks in my head. Say what you mean and mean what you say. If you're going to say something, you better back it up. That's just
integrity.
Something. Yeah, correct. And I know this is going to sound bad because I am older in the boomer generation, but integrity is something that is not a given anymore. And it isn't, I think that is sad. I think that is very sad. But,
I agree. It goes deeper. I think we've become, because of technology, things become very superficial, and we've kind of become this techie world where we have lost some soul a little bit along the way. And I hate to say that too, but I think it's a little bit of all generations as well. When you see people go out to dinner and they're texting instead of actually enjoying the dinner that someone cooked for you, that you're paying for, and you're here to have a conversation, and people have actually texted each other on a table. I mean, it's like, what are you doing?
That's
insane.
Crazy.
So we've kind of lost, this is some of those things. And, what your dad was saying is also very important, because it makes you stop and think before you open your mouth. That's so hard, Lisa.
I know. And then another one of his, what I call infamous sayings is, and he always used to say, you made your bed, now sleep in it. Basically, you made the choice, whatever that choice was, good, bad, or indifferent, deal with it, And that to me is maturity, and that to me is commitment and respect and that type of thing. If you're going to go all in, well, then go all in and take the consequences either way. This pointing fingers of that it's always somebody else's fault drives me crazy.
It does. Well, we do have issues, and there are things that are going to delay you, but you try to work around them, or being straight up, not use it. You can be delayed. There can be an accident on the road that can keep you trapped for 6 hours. Been there, done that. And so you're late, but it's got to be genuine, and you should have already been started out earlier. So there are real things that happen, but you can't cry wolf either.
Right. And then, one of the other things, and this I think came from my grandparents, was that basically, and this really, you shouldn't even have to tell people this. It's sad that you do, but basically family's everything. And, and people show that in different ways. Like my grandmother, she used to cook up a storm. I mean, and she was a great cook, and she used to, people are coming over. There might be 5 people there and there's enough food for 25. It's just, that was her way of opening her house and that was her way of showing hospitality. She cooked till you couldn't even believe it. So, it's just something that sticks with you. I mean, even nowadays, I still cook way too much food for people. It's something that I don't know. It is what it is. And I remember, years ago when my kids were younger and, not all out on their own, I haven't done it in a number of years, but, I used to, at my house, have open house twice a year, once in the summer and once at Christmas time. And I'd cook for 3 days, and it would just, you invite friends, you invite family, you invite co-workers, cool. And it's one of those, come if you can, stay 5 minutes, stay 5 hours. It doesn't matter. And we used to have such a great time.
We did a lot of that when I was growing up in South Africa, and it was all ages. So if someone had what we'd call a braai, which is a barbecue, and all ages would come, and it wasn't just your friends going; it was their friends and their family. And this is how we never got away with stuff. I mean, we did do naughty things as kids, and we'd all get busted at the same time because everybody knew what we were doing and who, what, and where.
Well,
but that's the village, and it felt so good to have a village. It felt loving. You tried to get away with stuff, and it was fun. It made it even more fun because if you did get away with it, you were good.
Or you just thought you got away with it, but there was somebody there that saw it and go, it's no big deal.
But when you got nailed, you had to suck it
Yes.
up. You knew it.
Yes.
But most of the parents actually found joy of their kids being brats because they knew that the
Yep.
kids were thinking. And
Yep.
So
That goes
Go ahead.
back to the make your bed, sleep in it.
Oh yeah. Oh, speaking of that, so I want to tell you so I started working for Nancy right out of high school. And I was working during high school. And it's funny because having all these reunions with my friends from South Africa and England, some of them live in England now, went to high school and worked for her. And so they were reminding her of her being like their first boss, She's like, oh yeah, that's right, And we were the bag sealers. Like we'd have to put her magazine, and send it out to subscribers and seal the bags, put the labels, type the labels, all of that. And she had a sealing machine. I mean, it was crazy. Like we're talking old school typesetting, you name it. We did all of that as kids. And she put us to work. And that's why I called my mom Nancy, because I used to answer phones, but you couldn't go, hey mom, I had to go, Nancy, this is before they had hold buttons and, this is how old we are. But anyway, it was one of my first days at work for her. And so she had a house and then there was like an office area separate. And I wasn't late, but she decided I was late, going with your family laws, of 5 to 10, like I should have been there 15 minutes early. And because I was the daughter and she had employees, she needed to grill me worse than anybody. Like, you are going to go through hoops. And I was I was in bed still, but I knew, because I partied the night before, just being honest. And I wasn't late. Do you know what she did? She ran downstairs to where I was, down at this other part of the property where I had my own little house kind of thing. And she says, you need to get up. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'll be there on time. And I was going to be there on time. I don't know. She spoke to someone. She came down and I can't remember if it was a bucket of water or I think she brought the hose in, and I got doused in my bed for not being there 15 minutes early.
Wow. There you go.
That was my welcome into the company. So her staff knew, and she's like, you didn't show up at this time. I'm like, but I'm not late. She goes, not good enough. Boom.
Yep.
Boom.
There you go.
So when you talk about you made your bed and lie in it, I did. Yep. It was cold.
There you go.
Even though it was
as wet as it was
cold. Yeah. That was a lesson.
And then and then the last thing, I'll wrap up my little section of this and this comes from my young granddaughters. And now keep in mind, when I say young, I'm talking under 5. And her comments were always, like she was in preschool or whatever. And, we FaceTime a lot because they don't live close by. So we FaceTime and, it's always house school, whatever. Well, her thing is you make good choices. Like, she would be telling me about some little boy that might have gotten in trouble. And now you're talking 3 years old here. And I was like, well, what did he do? Well, he didn't make good choices, Nana. And you have to almost bust a gut, because then you have to ask her, okay, well, what did he do? And she would explain. And this is, again, like a 3-year-old. And, so that, and she'd be like, well, he did this and it wasn't a good choice, Nana. And so then, time goes by or whatever, and you get the reverse. You're like, and it's like, well, what did you do? Like, now she's in kindergarten, so the teacher there, one of her things is you earn tokens or little whatever. So if she has a set of rules, and if you don't break them or whatever, you get to keep your tokens. And if you break a rule, you have to give some of the tokens back. And then of course mom and dad know what happened in the day. So one day I was talking to her and I said, on that particular day, she had lost like 2 of her tokens or whatever. Uh-oh. And so I said to her, well, I guess that means you didn't make good choices today. She goes, no, I didn't make good choices. And, with the whole sad face thing. And this is from some child that, is 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And I was like, that's awesome. But that seems to be her mantra. Make good choices. And I give kudos to her parents, my son and his wife, that that's what they have instilled in her is you make good choices. And if you don't, there are consequences. And I think that's pretty awesome.
I love that. I mean, because choices are everything. And even if you make a
Correct.
wrong choice, you're going to learn from it. Failure
Right.
leads to success. It's part of a program called the Eight Keys of Excellence created by Bobby DePorter. We did many, many shows on this. And I think the website is still there. Go to 8keys.org, the number 8. And it teaches you these 8 keys of excellence. The first one being integrity. And the other one is taking ownership, which I think is what you're talking about, is taking
Mm-hmm.
ownership for your actions, whether it be the bad ones and the
Right.
good ones. And when you do well, have a party, y'all, especially if you're in Mississippi. Have a good time, enjoy it. So I think, what you're talking about is like failure leads to success is the second key of excellence. And that, to me, whenever we make a mistake, don't get too down in it. Learn from it. Like switch gears
Right.
into learning. You can pout for a little bit, but
Correct.
not too
Everybody's
long.
going to make a mistake. What I think, I don't know, and I may be misquoting her or something, but it seems to me I read something about, a mistake is a mistake, or one mistake is one thing, two mistakes is a choice, or something along those lines.
Oh, see, now we go back to that.
Everybody makes mistakes, but if you make the same mistake, that's a choice.
Yeah, exactly. That is a choice. And that's, and pretty much everything is a choice. We always have
Uh-huh.
more than one choice. You just may not like the other one, the
Correct.
alternative.
Correct.
And sometimes you have to go through it. And when we go through caca, I get to call it caca, right? That's the legal term. You learn from it and you're growing. You're always growing through the negative.
Mhm.
The darkest time is going to give you the lightest time. It really does
Correct.
swing in
And
that way.
And it may be tough going through that. It may seem like it's eternal, but eventually what is it? This too shall pass.
Exactly. Oh, one of my favorites. That's a good one. That's a good one. I love this. Lisa, you got good family. You got good family, and
Well,
your name
yeah,
is Lisa too, so just saying, I'm trying to claim to fame. But, these are some of those basic things that, if you put it into action, it really helps. And then it helps you when things do get tough,
hmm
and so I got hosed on because, I was supposedly late. She still laughs at that, but I guarantee you I never was late again,
There you go. Exactly.
and I'm on time
Exactly.
all the time. And, I also learned in life, if you missed an opportunity, it's because you didn't show up. And it's the same lesson you're talking about, that about being on time. You showed up. And how many times do people lose opportunities because somebody else showed up before they did? How many times you
You
go to an
got it.
audition, acting, music, whatever, or an interview, and maybe the better candidate is there or didn't show up and you did? Who gets the job? The person who showed up. Not the
Correct.
person who is late, whether or not, or didn't show up on time. You're already disqualified. It's out. Sometimes there's a blue
That's
moon thing that some luck will change, but the people that show up, that's who gets hired. Because
Yep.
they,
You know what? There's a lot of cliches, and there's a reason they're cliches is because, that people well before you have, and what, like the cliche for what you were just talking about, the
Mhm.
early bird gets the worm. So it's, there's always
Yeah,
a
yeah.
reason for a cliche.
That's right. That's right. Well, Lisa, always a good time on the show with you. Thank you for joining us
Yes.
again. Everyone, keep up with Lisa. Go to writerlisa.com and go get 100 things to do in coastal Mississippi before you die. In other words, show up in coastal Mississippi. Don't be late either. You're not allowed to be late.
There
But
you
you
go.
get to relax once you're there and listen to good blues music, eat good food, see awesome coastal scenery, and go kayaking and look at birds, and go to the Audubon Center and go look at hummingbirds, all that good stuff. So good,
Yep.
good,
All
good
that good stuff.
Thank you, Lisa, and happy holidays. Happy
Well,
end of
thank
year.
you. Yes. Happy end of year and all that it brings to you as well.
cannot do a podcast about life lessons from family without Jeff Nelligan. He is an author. He is a dad of 3 military officers' sons, and he is known for writing about parenting. He also knows all about politics. He's written books on it too. His latest book is out now. It's actually in its 2nd edition. It's called 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, How You Can Raise Resilient Kids. And I think that is something so important in this day and age. I encourage you to go to his website, nelliganbooks.com. Welcome back, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, Lisa, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm doing great. And, I hope the people listening here, I will start out by saying they probably won't agree with much, but it'll certainly get them thinking.
Well, I think, sometimes parenting is about reality. And I think that's an important thing. And life is that, and sometimes tough love is real love, wouldn't you say?
I would definitely say that. And it goes back to one of your earlier observations when we were discussing this earlier, about the role of parents today. And, our role as parents is not to teach to build a relationship with our kids. We already have that. That's why we're called parents. Our role, and it just underscored by everything we were speaking about, is to teach our children to build a relationship with the rest of the world that's right outside that front door. And when I say the rest of the world, I mean, the schools, the athletic fields, the marching band that they're in, the community events, volunteer opportunities, the Home Depot, the Safeway grocery store, to be able for a kid to be able to navigate all that and all the people and all the unexpected events, so that when those kids are 18 or 20 or 24 or 30, they can move around the world with ease and with grace and with confidence. And kids that cannot move around the world with those qualities, end up 30, at age 24 or 28, sitting in the basement, getting really good at Minecraft and Call of Duty.
Yeah. And that's a sad part. And also, when you don't have that wherewithal of how to go and work around the world, right? And do what you need to do in life, I think that's when you end up in really bad habits beyond the Minecraft in the basement. I think that's how sometimes the drug thing can happen. Having the wrong friends and eventually that can that leads into craziness, right? And to sometimes criminal activity, which is sad. And it can also lead into, we've just recently did a show on this, on ending up in a cult, if you're trying to better yourself and that's how they snag you. It's like, oh, come, we're going to teach you all is fine. And then it's not, right? So, that is like some of the podcasts we've done really showcase how far south that can go if that training isn't in there about navigating the world and
Correct.
Being able to trust yourself. Isn't that part of it also for kids, is to be able to trust themselves? Like when you were growing up, I know your mom was, big in politics and you followed around, but wasn't there a time where your mom kind of pushed you out the nest so that you could fall down, get up, and then when you got up, you're like, oh, I can get up. I don't need the Band-Aid all the time.
You make a really good point, because what you're kind of easing up to is the fact that parents too often enable their kids, and they become the snowplow parent or the helicopter parent, and they don't allow the kid to fail. And early on, in raising my 3 sons, it was essential for me to, and it was almost counterintuitive, that I like seeing them in tough situations when they were 6 or 7 years old. Because guess what? No one gets a free ride in life. And the sooner you are able to confront a very difficult situation, whether it be academically or socially or athletically or, in a strange place with strange people around you, the better you are for the next time that happens, because it's going to happen the next time. It's going to happen the next week, the next day, the next month. and you begin to, develop almost a muscle memory and being able to, see your way through or around obstacles and setbacks and trials. And like, to refer to what I earlier said, if you don't have a kid who can get through those trials, he's 24 or she's 24 and they're in the basement. And the parent at that point is saying, what's the end game here? Is the kid going to be 30 sitting down there? And so parents really have to apply, and I'll use your term, that tough love early on.
The tough love is important, and it's like your parents, you're helping them navigate the world, and for them to grow and be able to handle things themselves. Eventually it's like, how many kids were raised without knowing how to sew a button or how to make toast and an egg for breakfast? There's a lot out there who don't know. And
right.
That's, then you go to college and you're spending your money on really bad pizza, which is fine for a little bit, but there's a line, of not being able to eat healthy. But I think there is also, there's one huge part of our younger generation now that are a little bit healthier than their parents, actually. So that's kind of cool to watch, this change over of health and awareness on that. But I also think the tough love part, Nancy and I, we talk about this all the time about how you can let past issues be your guide, or you can live in the present moment and trust yourself to know you can get through things because you've gotten through them before. If you haven't gotten through them, you still have to fake your way through and make sure, just give yourself that strength, believe in yourself, self-belief, right? But
right. And that's the reflex. And that's the reflex of hitting those obstacles and getting over them again and again and again. In my book, 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, I devote 2 chapters to examining and explaining really tough situations that my sons were in, that I just said, look, you need to figure this out because I'm not. Mm-hmm. And, there's plenty of failure in life. Yes, I have 3 sons who are military officers who went to, military academies. Interspersed in all that was significant failures, both on their part and significant failures they saw on my part professionally, getting fired from jobs. And those kind of, heads up, those warnings, those errors and failures are the best thing that can happen, because they teach a kid that they can be overcome.
Agreed. And that's how you start tackling bigger things. And that's how you climb the corporate ladder, if that's your journey. That's how you start to really achieve bigger goals in life. And then
it doesn't even have to be the corporate ladder. I mean, let's get real. You can start at the AutoZone as a sales associate, and you can rise to become a manager of the store. Mm-hmm. That's a tremendous success. You don't have to work for Goldman Sachs on the trading desk.
No, you could be starting your own business. Now that you want to talk about hard and resiliency, you're going to need resiliency and a bunch of spoonfuls of that to get through it. And that would be something, hey, start, I love seeing when, I know that this got illegal in some states, or they try to put laws on them, of kids doing the lemonade stand. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, maybe it was California. just messing with you, California. But those kinds of things of, we didn't make as many sales. What did we do wrong? Why not? Oh, maybe we did it on the wrong day, the wrong time, wrong corner of the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Those lessons were so crucial to get into business. I mean, as a kid, I pretended business all the time. And then, then you start doing business and you're going, man, it was much easier as a kid. But, I think that's this thing of, as you start to overcome challenges, yes, fail, because that always teaches you something. So failure is vital to success. And when you do get success, is to continue doing it. And then you end up in that path of excellence, which means you still fail. So
that's correct. And, Lisa, you make another great point. I mean, maybe it's because you kind of see the panorama of the country and the way you travel around and, meet different people every day, is that everybody listening to this, I know this for a fact. Every single person listening to this right now has had to overcome major league failures. Mm. That's the human condition, is confronting adversity and getting over it. So there's no one listening to this that can say, well, I've never really had a tough time, or I've never hit the wall. We all have, and we've all survived. And so that's the template for raising, your children. And in fact, people don't understand that 75% of the time that they're going to spend with their boy or girl is over by the time the kid is 12 years old. Mm. And that 80% of the time they're going to spend with them is over by the time the kid is 18. So it's fundamental that you've got to have this strategy for parenting starting at a super early age, because by 18, it's 80%. And guess what? If you're not raising them, the culture is. And I don't think there's a single person listening that thinks the culture raising a kid is a very good idea.
No, that's personal. Like, if someone complains to a parent about their child, like at a restaurant, it's like, ooh, war is on. Mama Bear is going to get you. That's not, don't.
I do it all the time.
I believe that, Jeff. I believe you going, hey, if you tried it this way, it might work.
Well, if there's some kid at a restaurant, if I'm at a Chili's or a TGIF and some kid's running around between the tables, I'll go over to the parents and I'll say, what the hell's going on here? And then I'll make a complaint to the manager. Because if I don't do it, who's going to do it?
A lot of what we see is neglect of
right.
that, the running wild child in the store. I remember I acted out really badly in the grocery store with Nancy. I was really young, and I kept trying to pull things off the store shelf. And she's like, if you don't stop, I'm going to leave you here. And she always backed up everything she did. Trust me. Do not even tempt it. If she says she's going to leave you there, she's going to. Because I just thought I wanted all the candy. I wanted, total brat mode. And then when I didn't get what I want, I had a temper tantrum in the store. What do you think Nancy did? She walked out the store and she watched me from the window. And this is a different age, era where, child snatching and everything wasn't as big a deal as now, but still, she could see and protect me. I couldn't see what was going on. And I do my little temper tantrum. And as soon as I realize she's not there, what do? I stop temper tantruming. Is that a word? I start, quiet, freak out, realize my mom is not there, big wide eyes. People are looking at Nancy like she is, the evil mother. Terrible. How could you leave your child like that? How could you do this? I never, ever misbehaved in the grocery store again. Ever. So doesn't that kind of go with that is that a harsh lesson? I don't think so. I thought it taught me something.
Right. And it goes back to that whole idea of the parents being enablers versus parents. And that, that's, the current generation, which is Gen Z, has had a lot of challenges, certainly. But every generation has challenges. But the go-to, kind of prescription for these challenges is to, like I said before, and to use the word, enable the kid. And again, this is very tough medicine for parents, but it only becomes tougher when your kid is that age, living at home and really not progressing on any kind of front, either professionally or educationally or even socially. We've got 42% of Gen Z lives at home. Mm. And this earlier stat that I told you about when I wrote my piece for the Baltimore Sun is that 60% of Gen Z new hires are fired within the first year of their job. And so there's with this generation, and I lay it completely almost at the foot of the digital addiction, screens and the use of social media. But that also too comes back to parenting, because the average kid between 10 and 18 spends 8 hours and 47 minutes a day on a screen on their cell phone. Where is the parent in all that? Well, many parents are, have the same addiction. So this look at parenting has to encompass all these kind of outside forces from society. And the wise parent is the one that resists them and that can ultimately build that resilient kid.
Exactly. I totally agree with you 100%. I'm not a parent, but I am a child of a parent,
Yeah.
and I've been through a bunch, and I can definitely talk about the lessons, I've learned. And I wanted to bring back reflection. We're at the end of the year. We're going into the new year. A lot of people do, resolutions and reset their goals and reevaluate. And it's always good to reflect and see what were the successes, what were the trials, where were the lessons, right? We could look at them as failures or mistakes, or call them a lesson, however you want to do it. You have a wonderful project that you do every year for your sons, and I think this is really something very cool that other parents may want to jump in and do too.
Certainly. We talked about it earlier. I'm kind of old school. If our listeners haven't already divined that, about 20 years ago, when my sons were very young, I started putting together scrapbooks, annual scrapbooks, for the year for each kid. And inside the scrapbook was photographs of what they had been doing, and school assignments and report cards and articles in which they'd been mentioned for athletics or something else. And every year they would get one of these scrapbooks, and it started. And then, of course, each year built upon the next. And so now for about 20 years, these kids every Christmas get the scrapbook, their year in review, so to speak. This is what we call it. And they can look back through the course of that year and say, wow, this is what happened. I forgot about this, And the great thing is about that Lisa, is that now we're talking 20 years of scrapbooks that they all have, and they can look back. And I gave you the example, here's their report card in 6th grade and their graduation diploma from 6th grade. And then 3 pages later is their report card from the Naval Academy or West Point and the graduation certificate. And they see that in that time period, this is what's happened from 6th grade all the way, 6th grade at, age 10 or 11, all the way to age 22 when they graduate from college. This is what's happened in the last 16 years. All this accomplishment and achievement, but also just a record of their life. And they're scrapbooks. They're not something that's in the cloud or online or anything. It's something they can.
It's not on Pinterest.
Right. It's something they can hold in their hands and look at. And obviously the hope is, they keep it. And then when, God willing, 2 of them are married, they begin families. They can, at some point yank them out and say, hey kids, this is what your dad was doing when he was 6 years old, so maybe it's an inspiration, but it's so old school, but it does have value in just reminding in a very hard sense, all the things they've done. And there's portions of these scrapbooks where, there's bad report cards, or there's, photos of when they were, failing at something, or so it's not just some wonderful walk, with a parade of rainbows. It's everything that they have, achieved or not achieved.
Well, you have to have that. It's kind of like a living graph, right? So like
right.
Next year, here it is, like, oh, this was a trial. This is, oh, look, your report card where you were, having, an issue now changed, or didn't. Okay, something has to happen to fix it,
Right. Right. And
So,
here's a typical example is here's a picture of your team at the end of the season, and your record is 2-8. You know,
mm,
guess what? That's not too, not, that's not fun, but that's the way it was that year. So, those kind of things are good. Again, it's the reality check. You began this whole thing about parents and, you know, reality is a part of parenting. I think reality is the only part of parenting.
but what you're doing with this is, the scrapbook is also showing attention, that you're paying attention to their lives, which is pure 100% love. You don't pay attention and collect everything. And that means you're having conversations about what's going on in all ages, right? So, that shows as you're an attentive parent, which is different than what you were saying, a snowplow or a helicopter parent. So it's an attentive parent.
Correct. I think, I always call it the engaged parent.
Oh, I like that better. Yeah, yeah.
And, the engaged parent does it, out of joy and love rather than just as a chore or seeing everything as a sacrifice. More than a few times people have, looking at my sons and what they've accomplished. And I will say that 90% of what they accomplished is, contributed is the result of my ex-wife, who's just magnificent. But people will say, oh, the sacrifices you made, and I will say, man, there's not a single sacrifice I've made in 29 years. Everything was done because I wanted to do it. And it was a joy and it was fun and it was uplifting. So that's the kind of cast of mind I had as a parent. Again, it sounds very old school, but that engagement is essential. And all during the time they were growing up, I didn't have some Joe job. I was working on Capitol Hill, or I was with the executive branch, working for cabinet officials. So, it wasn't as though, well, I just had a free ride at work so I could spend all this time with them. I made the time.
Yeah.
And,
I like that. That I think that is the biggest thing there, is making the time. It's so easy to just go downstairs and play Dungeons and Dragons,
oh,
or
yeah.
Minecraft, right? Just
Yeah.
it's kind of like, hey, the kids, making noise, give it a cookie.
Yeah.
The dog is misbehaving, give it a cookie.
There
No.
are too many cookies in our household.
Yeah, you know what I mean though, but that there's a difference between, okay, what's going on, and paying attention. And I think that's a really good lesson, as we go through and reflect and, pay attention to the positives and the negatives and the in between. The gray area is good. Don't ignore the gray areas. That's where shenanigans is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just saying. Jeff, thank you so much, and happy holidays to you and your family and your sons. And we look forward to a new year, 2025. I don't know. We may have to do a political show. Uh-oh, scandal. But looking forward to more conversations in the new year. Thank you so much.
Hey, great, Lisa. And, thank you for the questions. You make me stretch on these podcasts, and it's good. It's good because I don't know it all, and I'm the first to admit it. So I appreciate it very much.
I don't know it at all. Like, there it is. That's just it. I mean, that way you can grow. If you know it all, you aren't growing. You've stunted yourself.
There you go.
Who wants that? But everyone, NelliganBooks.com. Thanks so much.
All right.
So family lessons, that's the true thing. We all have someone in our family who has taught us something. And Kathleen Walls, is an author and travel writer. She roams the country getting all kinds of wonderful stories. And you've heard her on the show talking about her different books and different destinations and experiences she's had. And sometimes she's talking about New Orleans. Well, today she's going to talk about a special family member in her life and something she's learned from her. So everyone, you can go to AmericanRoads.net to keep up with Katie's adventures. and KatyWalls.com for her books, and that's Katy, KatyWalls.com. All of that is linked in the episode notes, but good to have you back on the show. Katy, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here.
I love this.
Go ahead. I was going to say my mom and dad were great people, but they both worked when I was little. So the person who had one of the biggest influences on me was my maternal grandmother, Mary Mullen. She was second generation Irish. Her mother had come over from Ireland when her father had died, and her mother had come over as a 12-year-old girl. So my grandmother had a lot of the Irish influence. She was 100% Irish. And she influenced me in so many ways, and she was a wonderful person. By the time I remember her, she was blind and couldn't see. She could see a little bit and then gradually lost all of her eyesight. But she was the one who taught me to cook. I still use my cast iron pans because that's what Nanny taught me to cook with. And she was born in 1875. And, of course, she lived through some strange times. As a young girl, she was always a bit psychic. I wish I had inherited a little more of it, but I guess I didn't. But was a very young girl. She had been engaged to another young Irishman named Joseph, and he was dying of TB. And the night he was dying, his brother came knocking on the door, and her father said, he said to the father, Joe's dying, and he wants to see Mamie. And her father was going to go upstairs and get my grandmother, Nanny. Mamie was really her name, Mamie Mullen. And as soon as he gets up and goes to open her bedroom door, she's already dressed, hand gloves, and ready to go. It's like she knew. And after he died, she felt she would marry. And for a time, she married later in life. She was in her early 30s, mid-30s. And she married a German, Frank Sherrick. And they had courted a bit before, but then they broke up because Frank was Lutheran and German, and Nanny was Irish and Catholic. And the funniest story that I remember from childhood, later on, after they had broken up, Frank Sherrick was a butcher, and he's driving his mule cart, trying to get across the street, and the mule just stops and won't go. And he's trying to drag the mule to get across the street. And while he's standing there trying to do this, Nanny comes walking down the street with her friend, and they meet again and get to talking, and they begin going out. Well, I guess not going out that day, but courting in that day. And he converted to Catholic, and they got married around 1908. And my mother was their only child. And the other thing about Nanny that was really unusual, she used to read the cards. She would take just a regular card pack, not carrot cards, and she'd lay them out with 2 on top, 2 on the bottom, and the rest would be rows of 8. And she would foretell that we were going to move and all sorts of things. I remember the moving, because if she would read the cards and say, oh, Rita, we're going to be moving, my mom was Rita. Sure enough, within a couple of weeks, they'd find another house, we'd move and be fixing up again. And
wow.
She was a very powerful strength. As a young woman, the Irish didn't believe in formal education much of the children. They didn't have the money, really. And she had like maybe a 6th grade education, but she loved to read. And one of the things, the way she earned her living as a younger woman, she worked as a seamstress. She'd go to these wealthy women's homes, and she'd make even like wedding dresses. And she was a fantastic. Wow. She's the one who gave me my love of cooking. We used to make fruit cakes every year. And we would make them pretty much from scratch. About the only thing that we would buy already cut up with those little red and green cherries stuff. We'd take the pecans, we'd shell them, put them in it. And she never used wax paper. She would take and cut a piece of brown paper, like a bag, cut it in a circle and put it in the pan, grease it and put it in the pan. And we use that for wax paper. And one of her favorite sayings that I always remember her telling me, don't borrow trouble. You have enough of your own. And she was one of the biggest influences in my life. And she died. I was around 12 when she died. And
so she taught you how to be frugal, you know?
Right.
And
she taught me a lot of very valuable lessons and even ways to think, cooking. I wish I had learned more of the card reading from her because it was amazing. I don't now remember all of the things, but at the time I remember. And my mother used to read the cards a little bit too. And then this Jesuit priest told her one day that was a sin, so she quit, and I never got any more card reading lessons. But
Oh.
I still remember 2 red 10s together mean you're going to move. We moved a lot as kids.
Oh boy, 2 red 10s. I'm going to watch for that now.
They would buy a house, a cheap rundown house, fix it up. And we, not like the flippers today. And we did everything ourselves, my mom and dad both. And they would fix the house up while we were living in it, which got to be kind of fun sometimes. And then after a while, they'd sell it and buy a little nicer house. But it was the way of life in New Orleans for me as a kid growing up. And many of the things like the cast iron pots, I still use. For cast iron frying pan sits on the stove all the time. It's a regular go-to for me. So.
Gosh, I love that. That you get down and dirty. You know what I mean? To fix things, and it's like not being wasteful. So being frugal is not taking more, but we cause more stress over thinking we need all these extra things. Oh, I need the newest fashion or, these new things when you really don't half of the time. So then you end up working harder. And also it's a lesson of not wasting and reusing and also preserving these houses that they were buying and then fixing up, right? And it's better than them going dormant.
Learning to improvise. If something wasn't working, you would find a way to fix it if you could. I used to say my dad could fix anything. He used to take watches apart and little tiny watches and take them apart and fix them and get them back running again. Nobody even wears watches anymore, hardly.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, I know, right? Now we have those watches that are like a cell phone. People.
Right,
I don't
they're
have
digital,
one of those.
and we depend on our cell phone for everything.
Yeah, I think there was these skills that I do have to tell you. I did interview a watch and a clock gentleman up in Wisconsin, and I can't remember the name for it, but it's a funny name, and if you say it wrong, we might get bleeped out on the podcast. But it's a family tradition that was passed down through his generations of family, and really interesting, to keep that alive. He's like, well, people still have grandfather clocks in their houses, and so there's still an industry. It's just not as frequent anymore, but people still have those beautiful clocks and watches, and if it could be an heirloom that's passed down. I mean, the watches back then also there were ones that were like a compass as well, So
and everybody wore a watch those days. We've so many ways we've changed. Now people just more or less follow directions, do whatever your latest movie star is doing. And we don't save things. If something is the slightest bit broke, we don't try to fix it. We just throw it away and buy a new one. Especially computers.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, but they set it up that way. It used to be that we could buy a car, right? And I had to learn how to change tires, do my own oil and all of that stuff,
right,
before I was allowed to even set foot in driving a car. What I did with my friends was a whole other thing, but don't tell Nancy. But we used to drive down sidewalks, but anyway, just in the neighborhood. But we had to learn somehow, right? But really wide. Our neighborhood. This is like my end of school years, and was really wide, grassy area. So it wasn't like normal sidewalks. It was just these really. So we had like almost the size of a road. So anyway, I wouldn't get away with stealing Nancy's car though. She would have got me. But I had to learn how to do all those things before I was allowed to learn how to drive, had to read everything, do everything. And now you can't even change your own tire if you get a flat tire. It's just impossible,
I remember my dad actually getting the tire off of a rim on an old tire, taking off, and he would take and roll over the tire, the edge of the tire with the car. I mean, nowadays, nobody's ever heard of something like that, but he would pop the rim loose and he could then take the tire. But anything, he never took his car to a mechanic. He fixed it himself. And he tried to teach me. After I tore out my third transmission, too much drag racing, he said, okay, you're going to learn to fix it. And he made me crawl under there with him. $35 for a new transmission at the junkyard. Not new, but another transmission at the junkyard, complete with the little circle thing, and I had to crawl under the car. I got my fingers all dirty and nasty. He did most of the work, really. But today, people don't do that. Whatever it is that their main field of work is, that's all they know how to do.
And like a transmission is more like $3,500 versus $35 now, depending on the car. You know.
Exactly. The last transmission I had to replace was $2,300, and that was quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it's up there, but you know, I'd still rather pay that than buy a whole new car, just because of the waste.
Yes, that runs in the thousands.
Yeah, tens of thousands these days. Yeah, I mean, I just think, you know, those kinds of lessons, you know, that prudence would be the word, I think, so that we don't waste. It's better for the environment, but it also saves your pocketbook, you know. You can save your money for something, you know, like travel, you know, or like, hey.
You can't beat travel now. Those are the memories no one can take away from you.
And learning to cook yourself, too, will save you money, you know, and it can be fun to do. So I love the lessons from your family and your Nana. I call grandmas Nanas. But that is.
I call my nanny. Her name was Mamie Mullen. But.
Wow.
Mamie Mullen Sherrick after she married, but she was always nanny to me.
Oh, that's cool. It's a very, very nice to hear about, you know, that connection. And I think so many of our younger generation do have their grandparents as their caretakers as kids. You know, I think that's always kind of been that way, you know? Yeah. And I think for grandparents, it's like a second wave of parenting once they learned how to parent on their kids. And then when the grandkids come, they're like, all right, I won't make this mistake again.
Right. Well, with Nanny being blind, she couldn't live on her own. So she lived with us as long as, you know, always until she passed away. And it was a help for her because she couldn't have survived out on her own, not being able to see. And my mom and dad would have had to have a caretaker or somebody pay for. Daycare wasn't a common thing in those days. But
well, that's another lesson of everyone supporting each other, you know? So that's a good one.
My mom learned the real estate thing, the buying was my mom's idea. My dad was very good at fixing things, but his family didn't have that buying thing. My nanny was the one who would buy and sell before I ever remember, before my mother was ever married. You know, she was very smart. I can remember even when she obviously couldn't see, my mom would say, and that's where I got my love of reading. My mom would sit on the side of the bed, and I slept in the same bed with Nanny when I was little. And Mom would sit there and read grown-up books, which I was never one for little kids' books. I just was, and she was reading it because Nanny couldn't see to read, but she wanted to read.
Yeah, that's, you know, we're stronger working together. Would that be another lesson that we're stronger?
Would.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You can't do everything on your own. That's for sure. That's definitely a lesson right there. Well, thank you so much, Katie. It is always fun chatting with you. Everyone, you can keep up with Katie again. Go to AmericanRoads.net and also KatieWalls.com. The links are in the episode notes, and keep up with her. She's got some great destinations coming up that she's going to be visiting in 2025, and I know she's always writing something new. So a lot coming up. Thanks, Katie, and happy holidays to you.
Well, happy holidays. Thanks for letting me talk about my grandma with you. I've enjoyed it. And you have a wonderful holiday, too.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.